Hi there, Nick here from Conservation Careers and welcome to the podcast. Now today's guest is Romulus Whitaker. He's a renowned herpetologist and conservationist who's referred to as the Snake Man of India. Romulus shares his lifelong passion for snakes, conservation and the incredible biodiversity of India's rainforests. In this episode, we discuss what drew Romulus to snakes, especially the King Cobra, his experiences in the rainforest and the significance of water in forest conservation. We also delve into how Romulus started several conservation projects, including the Agumbe Rainforest Research Station, and the importance of inspiring future generations. Finally, we also discuss his new book, Snake, Drugs and Rock and Roll, which tells the story of a boy who would become one of the greatest conservationists of his generation. It's a fascinating, insightful and inspiring podchat. Enjoy.
My name is Romulus Whitaker. Although I was born in America, I had the great fortune of coming to India at the age of 8 and spent my life here. And I was already smitten by snakes from the time I was 4 years old growing up in northern New York State. And when I came to the land of snakes, you can imagine I was overjoyed. I'm not sure how my mother felt about that. Well, she was encouraging all the way, but when we came to the land of cobras, I think she thought twice about it and tried to, subdue me a little bit. But that was my introduction. That is my introduction because from there it was all uphill.
Great. Well, welcome to the podcast. It's really kind that you're sort of sharing an hour with us today. So you're known as the Snake Man of India, and as you say, your passion started when you were 4 years old and moved to India soon after. Why snakes? Like, what is it about snakes that's fascinated you since childhood?
I've been asked that question a lot, and I've kind of analyzed it, and I think I've got an answer.
Mm.
Correct me if I'm wrong, everybody, but I think all kids are interested in small things which creep and crawl, and they're in little things. And usually the parent, of course, wants them not to touch that nasty insect or that nasty reptile because, well, honestly, it could be venomous or poisonous. So they don't encourage stuff like this. Well, I was encouraged, and I had a family which encouraged me to get into nature and to look at stuff and pick up stuff and look at it. And luckily, we lived in a place in northern New York State where there were no venomous snakes. So when I brought a snake home at age 4, my mother knew it was non-venomous. She might not have known what it was. Well, she did. It was a garter snake. So, she knew it was non-venomous.
Yeah.
So that was the ultimate in creepy crawlies as far as I was concerned. They were just so fascinating. And it's not as though they weren't not still fascinating because looking at that forked tongue, looking at the way they crawl, looking at the variety of colors that they come in, their habits, and what are they thinking? And is there any way you can connect to them? It's such a difficult animal to get across to. A tiger or, it's a big cat. It's like a cat, but it's huge. That's much more relatable to. But the snake is very hard to figure out, and I'm still trying to figure them out.
Still figuring it out today. Yeah. It seems like you have a particular passion. I mean, it's for reptiles more broadly. I know you know as a snake man, but when I've kind of read about your history and your background and an amazing career that you're having, the King Cobra seems to stand out as a kind of key species, like a flagship species, something that's really captured your heart and mind and the work that you've kind of focused on. Yeah. Tell us a bit about the King Cobra. I know it's a bit of an open question, but like, why particularly King Cobra? What I think particularly like what is the connection between King Cobra and people, particularly in India? Like, what are the threats, or how do people feel about it? Just paint us a bit of a picture about King Cobras and your connection to them.
Well, in a way, the King Cobra epitomizes the mysterious snake. I mean, in many ways, it's the super snake. It grows to a massive size. A King Cobra can reach 18 feet in length. It is highly venomous.
Yeah.
And yet it is, the way I interpret it, and I sort of evolved this description of it, it's a very innocent animal. It's an animal which tries to stay away from humans, but circumstances make it cross paths with humans. And it's usually very unfortunate for the snake because the human usually has a big stick or a shotgun or something like that and dispatches the King Cobra, except in a few places, which I'll get to it as we talk. But yeah, it's just so fascinating. The fact that it sits up and looks at you, and that I mean, to a lot of people, that's very scary and very disconcerting. To me, it's just enthralling because you see an intelligence in an animal which you think, snake, what got a tiny little brain. They couldn't think too much. But no, it's very different when you see a king cobra sitting up looking at you. You're looking at something sentient and very aware of what's going on. So the fascination, to me, is just natural.
Mm. I'm interested. Like when you come across a snake or a king cobra rears up. For me, I'm fascinated by wildlife. I'm fascinated by snakes and everything else. We don't see them very often here in the UK. We do now and again. My instinctive reaction is to kind of jump back. I'm immediately scared, and then I lean in, and then I'm really interested. Has your instinctive reaction to jump back and be scared has that been trained out of you? Is that still there, but you can control it? Like how do you feel when a snake rears up?
I jump forward.
Yeah.
No, actually, I'm controlling myself now. And my wife, Janaki, was quite critical of me. She says, look, you guys who like snakes and research snakes, all you want to do is go up and grab them all the time. Look at our friends who are researching tigers or leopards or elephants. They don't go out and grab them. And I say, yeah, that's because they can't. We had this banter going back and forth.
Yeah.
It's just something instinctive that I share this interest with thousands of people around the world, young, well, I wouldn't say necessarily young people, but people who are fascinated by snakes, and it's just getting past the fear, which might have happened early on, and some people would say no, it's something very primitive, and it's come from the primates and the monkeys. In fact, their eyesight developed so well so that they could avoid things like getting bitten by a snake, and that's why our eyesight is so good. There's all sorts of sort of theories, almost like a conspiracy theory about how we don't like snakes or how we're scared of snakes because monkeys are scared of snakes.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very hard to go beyond that kind of an explanation. To me, it's just natural, and it happened from the time I was so early. I don't have a reason why, really. It's just innately an innate natural interest and fascination.
Really interesting. And we're going to talk about snake conservation and the efforts and things that you've done through your career in a sec. One question I wanted to ask you, and it sounds like a bit of a strange question, but like, how do you approach a snake safely? I've never done it myself, but I've seen people like you with your sticks with the curly end on it, holding, looking very confident. Could you quickly walk us through how you feel safe approaching and handling snakes, particularly dangerous snakes?
Yeah, well, of course, obviously, that would be the first thing to determine what snake you're looking at. If it's a venomous snake, you're going to be very cautious, very careful, and ascertain, look at the circumstances where you're not going to lose your footing, for example, when you go near it. And using a snake hook is a standard device to pick it up and to gently handle it. And I think that word gentle comes in there very often when I talk about handling snakes, and that's such an important part of it. Because nowadays you see people, if you go to the YouTube channels and the Facebook channels of the real wacko sort of snake handlers, the snake molesters, as we call them, they're handling the snake roughly, and the snake is responding roughly and trying to bite and looking really vicious and angry. All these words of viciousness and anger, and it's not true at all. These snakes are scared like hell. And the way it's fun when you're on and talking to children, because I can tell them, okay, just imagine you're a snake. You're way down there on the ground, and you look up and you see this tall human being, boom, boom, with his huge. It's like a giant. I mean, it is a giant coming around. You're scared to death. What do? Well, either get the hell out of there fast or defend yourself. And how do you defend yourself? By making yourself look big, spreading a hood, hissing, striking, opening your mouth, making yourself look as dangerous as possible. But your little heart, and it is a little heart, is beating like crazy. And your whatever mental capacity you have is fear, fear, fear. Just don't let him kill me or touch me. Let me get out of here. So that's the way it is. Snakes are scared of us. So when we approach a snake, we're the ones on the offensive and they're the ones on the defensive. And picking it up very gently is a very important part of it. How you handle it after that depends on how the snake reacts. Um, uh, and it's so different with so many different species of snakes, whether it's a short, fat rattlesnake has to be handled very differently from a long, thin mamba, for example, in Africa. And I'm actually a bit nervous around mambas and some of these Australian snakes, these taipans and stuff like that. Wow, they're, I would say, scary. And
Yeah.
I've had a bit of experience with them, but I like our cobras and our Russell's viper. I like Indians. I'm very used to handling the snakes that I work with. And king cobras, another very interesting point is the smaller snakes are the ones to be scared of because they're so agile and so they can sort of skip around. Like a small king cobra, a small cobra, is a very difficult snake to handle just because it's so jumpy. And whereas a big snake, if it turns around and starts charging at you with its mouth open, you've got a few seconds to react. You've got a stick and you can hold it back and then go back to your gentle handling sort of thing routine. So and all these things that I'm telling you is stuff that we've learned over the years. And I really object to the guys who are quite crazily handling the snakes and treating them roughly, and the snake reacting the way it does is quite justified. I mean, he's defending his life.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. Absolutely, yeah. Let's talk conservation, and particularly Agumbe. It's a research station that you set up in, I think it's around 2005. But you first visited Agumbe, I think sort of 30 or some years ago. You were searching for king cobras at the time, is that right?
Yeah. 1972, I had already set up the Madras Snake Park, and that's in a city called Chennai right now, here in South India. And we would have 1 million visitors a year, and people kept coming in and saying, "So where's your king cobra? And we've seen your cobras, we've seen your vipers, we've seen this and seen that. We want to see a king cobra." So I was under pressure, and I met an author called Kenneth Anderson who wrote some wonderful books, very similar to the kind of works that Jim Corbett wrote, Nine Man-Eaters and a Rogue, and all this kind of stuff. He would shoot rogue elephants and man-eating tigers and stuff, and write these very, very graphic books about it. When I met him, he says, if you want to find king cobras, go to a place called Agumbe. And it didn't take me long to get on a bus and go to Agumbe. And I didn't even have a snake bag big enough for a king cobra with me. I had a sleeping bag. And the first 24 hours I was there, I ran into I actually saw a snake disappearing into the bushes, and I jumped on it. It had a black tail. I thought it was one of these rat snakes. It's a large, non-venomous snake. But when I was lying flat on the ground with my hand on its tail, this hood sort of reared up over me. And whoops, I caught the wrong snake. I mean, you can imagine what was going through my head in a couple of seconds. I let it go immediately and said, no, I just let go of my first king cobra. No, 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 no. So I quickly scouted around and picked up a stick and poked a pile of bushes, and it came out again. And then I caught it. Well, I mean, the whole catching operation was a pretty long story, but I managed to get it into my sleeping bag because I didn't have a snake bag big enough for it. So that was my first experience with Agumbe and with a wild king cobra. It was like, wow, it was my day. I was the Maasai warrior who had killed a lion or something like that.
And when you looked up, having triumphed and caught the species that you're after, and you started to appreciate Agumbe, and it's become a place very close to your work and I guess your heart.
Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
special about Agumbe? What drew you particularly to that area and to be working there?
Well, the fact that it gets up to 8 or 10,000 millimeters of rain every year, that's 8 or 10 meters of rain every year. That's the first part of it.
Yeah, so it's
That
wet.
means there are hordes of leeches that come out during the monsoon. So you have to put up with a bit of discomforts when you go to a place like that.
Yeah.
But as a rainforest goes, it is spectacular. Every step you take, you're seeing hundreds of things which you couldn't possibly identify, the plants and the creatures, the insects, the butterflies, the grasshoppers, the snails. I mean, it's just so full of life, and of course, plenty of snakes. There are wonderful pit vipers there. There are coral snakes. There are shield-tailed snakes, very, very colorful shield-tailed snakes. And then again, the king cobras, they're always at the sort of apex of the pyramid.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just so full of life. It's just an incredible place.
Yeah, and one thing I was struck as I was just doing a little bit of reading before our chat today was the importance of water. You mentioned rainfall there, and I know you're experiencing a lot of rain here today, and it's the end of kind of monsoon season for you. The reason the forest is there is because of the rain, isn't it? But yet you've lost a lot of forest. The 75% of forest has been lost from the kind of Western Ghats region, which Agumbe forms part of.
That's right.
What's the connection between the water, the forest, the wildlife, the people? Are these things interconnected? And yeah, and how has water become an important focus of the kind of conservation efforts that you're involved with?
Well, it's interesting to try to get people to understand that deforestation can actually mean loss of water. How? But the experience that I've had and the time that I've spent over the years, over the decades now, I can say safely, in going to these forests, I've seen where forests have disappeared. The tiny streams which used to feed the big rivers have totally disappeared. So what's happening to the big rivers? Well, they're obviously going down too, because the rain starts up in these water catchment areas. And these catchment areas include a place like Agumbe. This high rainfall hits that wonderful landscape, which is so full of vegetation with the root systems and the moss and everything else holding the soil. So, and letting the water ease down, not rush down, but ease down into the little streams going down into the bigger streams, and then down into the mighty rivers like, for example, the Kaveri River, which is our biggest river in South India, which is the sustenance for literally hundreds of millions of people. So, getting this across to people has been an adventure and a focus of a lot of the stuff we're doing through the films, through the lectures, through getting kids out into the forest to appreciate things. So, getting them excited about the little creatures that we find, and some of the bigger creatures, and some of them which they might have been scared of and thought were very dangerous before. And it was just like me when I was a kid. They are fascinated by it. People might be scared of snakes, but they're always fascinated by them.
Yeah.
And this has been a real strong focus of the work that I've done all over the years. And I'm really happy to say that it has spread amazingly widely. I can remember starting out as the sort of first local snake guy around wherever I was, whether it was Agumbe or back in my home state of Madras.
Yeah.
I was just one of the very few people interested in snakes. And now there are, hundreds of people interested in snakes. And it's not just me that did it, obviously. Television, Steve Irwin, you can name a lot of really good people who have done some fantastic work in publicizing the positive aspects of animals like snakes. This has all meant so much to change people's attitudes. So things have changed drastically, and it's wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I did read about you as well, and just reading anything about you, you sparked so many projects, so many things have started and then independently then grown forwards, I'm sure with support, but like other people have been running these things that you've initiated. Yeah. Do you want to give me some examples of things you started? And a wider question is like, how have you managed to start so many projects? Like, what have been the secrets of that success that others can learn from?
Yeah, I think the secret of success is just nonstop interest and fascination by things, and just letting it spread.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, I don't think I have ever planned things very well. I've jumped into things and just fell in love with them and just gone for it, and people latched onto it as well, because they see this crazy dude with the long hair and stuff like that doing something but which is fascinating, and they join me. I'll give you an example. I first went to the Andaman Islands in 1975, and I had already read a lot about the Andaman Islands. There was never any sort of conservation effort there at all. It was completely devastated. I mean, it was getting devastated by the forest department, by they were just ruining the islands just by taking out all the big timber. And I'm not only I, but I and my colleagues made a lot of noise. We started a field station there. And by making all this noise, we actually got the then prime minister to start things to turning around and saying, look, things like fisheries and tourism would be much more important for the islands than just taking, and they actually stopped removal of timber of all the big trees, which again, I can take some credit for it, and I don't want to take too much credit for it.
Yeah.
But it was just like waking people up to it, and then things started moving from there. Also, I got involved in a project in the early 70s by going to a beautiful rainforest in Kerala, the state of Kerala in southwestern India. And the name of the place was Silent Valley. Now, what could be better, to already have a name which has magic to it. So when I got down into Silent Valley, I was just the typical snake guy going down looking for some pit vipers. I didn't know anything was happening there. But when I got down to the bottom of a little trail, there was a Jeep and a generator and some guys fiddling around with some dynamite and stuff. And I just talked to them quite friendly and said, what's happening? Oh, we are doing seismic blasting. We are going to put a dam across from here over to that hill there. And we are going to flood this forest to produce electricity for Kerala. And I don't know, at that time, conservation wasn't even a well-known word, here in South India. And yet I somehow, man, that just hit me. They're going to flood this forest? I mean, come on, you can't do that, So I wrote the World Wildlife in India had just started about 3 or 4 years prior to that, and they had a monthly or a quarterly newsletter. And I wrote a piece, Save Silent Valley. It was sort of a real basic thing and probably bad English and everything, but the point was it woke some people up to the fact that here is a fantastic rainforest about to go under. And then the people who got involved were very high level people who knew a lot more than I did about, look, if they, for example, if they fixed their wiring systems from the other dam projects, they could produce much more electricity and save much more electricity than could ever be produced by drowning a rainforest. I didn't know that. But this is the kind of thing you just have to start some ball rolling, and the right people get on the bandwagon, and it happened. And it was it's called India's first really big environmental movement, and I just feel so proud. Wow, I was involved in it. So yeah.
Yes, well done. Yeah, and a lot of it sounds like banging the drum, raising awareness, communicating, and then attracting the right people into the movement. Yeah,
precisely.
Yeah, incredible. You've been described as someone who hasn't had a very traditional career path. That's probably quite accurate. And even in conservation, you describe yourself as a non-academic, but you're known as a leading expert. Yeah. Do you think people could have a similar career path to you today? Do you think someone could have a similar passion age 4 and follow their passion as you have, or do you think the world's maybe different? I don't know.
I have a bit of a problem with this because I am often asked by especially young aspiring students, mostly they're at some level in university, and should I go on? I'm getting a little bit bored with this daily classes and all that. And if I really wanted to pour my heart out, I would say, just chuck it, man, just jump onto something good and do it. But India is a pretty conservative country still, and to go through the whole lineup of the educational routine seems to be the way to go. Seems to be the way that you can get a job in one of the main institutions which is doing science and conservation.
Yeah.
So it's kind of tough for me to say, be like me, shun academics and go out. The parents, of course, would shoot me, first of all. But second of all, it may not be very good advice for some of these kids. So it's a hard question to answer.
Yeah.
And I think I probably come to the point of I say, keep this passion, keep this flow of interest going while you're doing your academics. And it will take you to where you can do the best good and make yourself feel good and do the best good for the country and for conservation. So I think that's the best lesson I can hand out to them. And I think by giving them an opportunity through right now we have something called the Madras Crocodile Bank, which is a large reptile zoo. It's a zoo, but a very special zoo, because a lot of people come there as volunteers, both from abroad as well as from all over India. And I started telling my colleagues, including my ex-wife at the Madras Crocodile Bank, let's start making a list of all the graduates of the Madras Crocodile Bank, all the then kids who have become prominent conservationists. And it's quite impressive. There's quite a few very leading people in conservation who started out as kids, really, and volunteered cleaning up croc shit and, just sort of, getting their hands dirty and hands-on experience with animals because it's so fascinating. And then met the other people who visited there, scientists. We'd invite scientists to give talks and lectures. So as you were saying earlier, it's such a tight community in a way, and you meet someone who can put you on to the next phase of what you're going to do in life, and that's precisely what the Croc Bank has been able to do. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, and I guess your son Samir, who's a friend of mine, also an ex-colleague, he's probably one of the graduates who's gone off and carving his own route in conservation. The question to ask around that is, what skills do people need as conservationists in 2024? Like, what are the kind of key attributes people should develop in themselves if they're going to be successful in this sector?
Guts and patience, and I've gone through quite a few ups and downs. Fortunately, I've got a brain which sort of chucks the negative stuff out, so I can concentrate on the positive stuff. But it is very frustrating, and particularly where you have bureaucracies which seem to be working against you, even though they say that they're working for conservation. It's such a bureaucratic bind that, heck, you got to somehow dodge that. You got to get around it or get over it or work your way through it or convince them to do things the way that you think they should be done. It's a tough wrangle. And finding the funds for it, for example, which is where an institution like Whitley Fund for Nature comes in. Wow. I mean, that just opened up the whole, the idea of starting a rainforest research station. That's a great idea, but how are you going to fund it? So that's where Whitley just came in right at the right time.
Yeah, that's great. And thank you for mentioning that also. We're going to talk about Whitley and well, let's talk about that. You've had a few awards through your career, Whitley Fund for Nature being one, Rolex being another, and I know there've been others too. Let's talk specifically about Whitley. Like when did they support you? Why did they support you? And what difference has it made to you?
In 2004, I went to Agumbe to work on a film, which is called The King Cobra and I. And it's a film which was done for BBC, Natural World. And my wife and I were wandering through the forest in Agumbe looking for a good location to do some shots and stuff like that. We came upon this little farmhouse surrounded by forest. I had no idea that someone has actually had a bit of private land in the middle of the forest there. Yeah. And there was an old man who said to me, I mean, I don't speak the local language then, Kannada, but I got enough out of him, and we could sort of by sign language and stuff. He said, do you know anyone who would like to buy my land? I've got two sons, and they're idiots. They go off to the city. They want to work, and they're never going to come back here and work. I have to sell my land. I didn't express too much interest. I said, well, we'll check it out.
Play it cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, my mother had passed away, and she had left me a small nest egg, a will, which just happened to be the amount of money it took to buy that 5 acres of land. And it was just, I had already told her about this before she died, and she was very keen on the idea. So it was just like one of those serendipitous things that happened. So buying that land was one thing, okay, and I had purchased the land, but then how do I develop it? And then I heard about the Whitley Fund for Nature and the application procedure and so on that I had to go through. And I made that application and told them exactly what I wanted to do. And I guess it worked because I got this amazing letter saying you're coming to England to, to give to accept the award and to give a talk. And wow, I had to put on a suit and all that, which is very unusual for me. I'm usually in shorts and a pair of flip-flops. And but it was wow, what an opportunity. Okay, I'm coming.
That's amazing. Yeah. And then what's happened then? So Agumbe Research Station was established, the funding
Yeah,
helped. What's happened in the intervening years? There's been around 20 years, yeah,
it
since
has been 20
established.
years.
Yeah.
Well, one of my goals, and it's pretty obvious what I wanted to do, and that is to study king cobras and using the king cobra as the sort of, uh, I don't know, sort of, I would say the sort of main species to study,
Yeah.
and the one which the flagship species, as people call it,
Yeah.
would be a way of attracting attention and interest and getting more people to get on board with me.
Yeah.
But having said that, that was just my personal interest. But there are a lot of people interested in fungi and earthworms and frogs and different kind of plants. And the botany of the place is fantastic.
Yeah.
So all these people wanted to work in the rainforest. But how the hell do you work in such circumstances, which hordes of leeches, is so wet your clothes never dry out? I mean, it is really tough. But if you create a sort of comfortable place for them to work, a place where they can come home in the evening and get their clothes to dry over a stove and have a good meal and a good sleep, and then they can get out there and work the next day. That's all it took. We started getting people interested in all these things which I just mentioned and more, and it started thriving. And as a result, we've produced oodles of peer-reviewed papers and conservation work from these wonderful people, these wonderful researchers, most of them young.
That's amazing, incredible. Yeah, and long may it continue, as long as it doesn't get washed away. We've got a bit of time left before we're going to hand over to some of our audience who'd love to ask you questions as well. I'd like to ask you some sort of broader questions about your career and also talk about the book that you've recently got published too, which is really exciting. I was going to ask, are you optimistic for the future of wildlife? But you've already kind of referenced the fact you're an optimistic guy. You've been smiling throughout this podcast. You really come across as a kind of happy, content individual. Yeah. And your mum, interesting, you mentioned a couple of times, she's supported you. She encouraged you with snakes and the garter snakes. She encouraged you to purchase the land in Agumbe. It feels like optimism is kind of built into your genes.
That's a nice thing to say. Yeah. I guess it's true. And I mean, there are a lot of problems, obviously, and the various governments that this country has gone through in the last 20 years, the ups and downs which I see, and the development which we need to do, and the poor whom we need to help. I realize that so much has to be done for everybody, but always it always has to be done in the light of looking after our natural resources and the natural resources which are sustainable and renewable. And that's probably the one thing that bugs the hell out of me, is just to see, okay, let's just drive this highway through the forest. Wait a minute. There's got to be another way of doing it, even if you have to go 10 kilometers around it to save a huge chunk of forest, or to save the wildlife who are going to be killed and crushed crossing the highway when it's going through. Can't we do something? So I'm not just doing that myself, obviously, but there's plenty of people who concentrate on the different aspects of conservation. And when it comes to clean water, for example, we talked about water earlier and how important it is. The river, the Ganges River, it's famous. Everyone knows the name, the Ganges River. Huge portion of the Ganges River is a sewer. There are soap suds, many feet thick, floating on the surface of the Ganges. And the Yamuna River, also a similar twin river of the Ganges. And these rivers are dying, and yet millions of rupees are put into sort of cleaning them out. But it looks like it's all for nothing, because they're not able to keep up with the pace of the pollution from industry, from sewage. So it's very depressing in that sense. And there's no way we can let up. We've got to have a very, very strong and very, very aggressive sort of attitude toward solving these problems, particularly these river problems. I would probably like to mention the gharial, which is that long, slender-snouted crocodilian, which is critically endangered, which we've taken quite a bit of effort to be involved in doing and researching them and finding out the best way to conserve them and help and influencing the government to do the right thing for them. And it's worked to a great degree. There's one river called the Chambal River, which is not a holy river, and therefore it's one of the cleanest rivers left. I mean, the irony of it is incredible. Just because the holy rivers, the Ganges and the Yamuna, are polluted by all the things that people throw in, including half-burnt dead bodies of humans and stuff like that. So, I know it sounds pretty bad, but this is the reality. And the Chambal River has been left more or less clean. And the gharial, when I went out and did surveys in the early 70s, there were about 200 left, and now there's several thousand of them there. So, hey, we're doing something right. But let that be a lesson to the big shots, the big people in government, to do something. And I'm a bit critical about government, not too critical because I got to watch my butt.
Yeah.
But, we've shown them a lesson and let them learn from that.
Yeah. If I could make you either a global czar for the day or the Prime Minister of India, I don't mind. You can take your choice. And you could enact one new decree to try and help save wildlife, biodiversity, however you want to frame that. What law or decree might you enact?
Only one?
You can have a few if you want. What's the first one?
Oh, the first one would very obviously be, let's let forests alone and try to get them back into some sort of shape, in particular along rivers. And well, protecting our rivers is probably one of the first things that has to be done.
Yeah.
That's a must right away.
Yeah. It's the lifeblood of the world, isn't it? Absolutely. Yeah. Have you got a second one you want to sneak in as well then?
I think just getting people to be aware and awake about the wild and about wild creatures and changing the attitudes that people have about it, because people are still very scared. I'll go back to snakes, I guess, because I mean, that's sort of a start of my life, and it would be a start for everybody if they took a more positive attitude toward these animals, which in fact kill so many rodents, which actually saves so much of our rice and wheat and all of our grain crops. Without snakes, we'd probably run into another famine in India, for sure, and it's no joke.
Yeah. Amazing. Well, I'd vote for you. Before we wrap up then and we hand over to our audience to ask some questions, I'd love to hear a bit about this book that you recently published, Snakes, Drugs and Rock and Roll. You got it there?
Yeah, it's maybe a bit disconcerting about this, but let's remember this is only my first 25 years. I became a very serious fellow after my 25th year.
Right.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. But
what story does the book tell?
Well, it does tell about what I started out telling you, my early days in New York State when I was fooling around out in the woods there. And, I didn't have to go to school for a few years there, so I was just turning over rocks and finding snakes. But from there, when we moved to India, I mean, it was such an incredible experience to come to a country like India. And for a boy, not only the interest in snakes, but just interested in everything around him. And the school that I went to was quite an incredible school. They actually sort of turned a blind eye to the fact that I had a pet python living under my bed. I mean, what kid is allowed to have a pet python? Okay, I have to admit I was a hunter in those days, and that's just the way it was. And I had an air gun, and I shot a lot of birds. Instead of being a bird watcher, I was a bird killer. But interestingly, my science actually started there because I learned how to skin birds, and I started making a collection of birds, which went to a museum. So I didn't know it then, but I was actually starting to do science. And my academics kind of suffered from the fact that I was mostly out wandering around in the woods, which I talk quite a bit about. And then when I got back to America, I tried various jobs. I I was a merchant seaman. Worked as a traveling salesman. I got drafted into the U.S. Army for a couple of years and became a lab technician. And then I got a job at a place called the Miami Serpentarium, and that was life-changing because working for William Haast, Bill Haast, was like, wow, okay, here's my guru. And he taught me how to extract venom from snakes, how to look after snakes in captivity. And it's basically what I wanted to do when I came back to India, which is precisely what I did. So the trajectory was pretty obvious and pretty direct, I've got to say, because I came back and within a couple of years, I had set up India's first reptile park and 1 million visitors were coming in. So, yeah, I mean, it's a bit more complicated than that. But the book tells, and the second volume and the third volume will tell you everything.
Yeah, I say this is the first volume, yeah, and it's available on Amazon. I've already looked. I'm already going to buy my copy. It sounds fantastic.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
And we'll drop a link into the podcast notes as well. So if anyone wants to have a
Please
look,
do.
to
Please
go
do.
read
It'd be
it.
wonderful if everyone buys it, and if everyone puts a little review in that would be incredible to get people to know what I've been doing over here.
Yeah, fantastic. Right, well, encourage others to do that too. Rom, it's been lovely to get to know you a little bit, and thank you for your time. It's been great talking.
Thank you, Nick.
Long may it continue. We're going to hand over to our audience in a minute, but thanks again. It's been wonderful.
Thanks, Nick. Great.
Right, okay, I'll stop recording there. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that, everyone. If you did, then please do hit the subscribe button to get notified of new episodes as they drop. And also, please give us a rating or a review because it really helps us to get in front of more people, and we really enjoy reading them all. As you'll have heard, our podcasts are now recorded in front of a live audience who sit in and listen to the chat, and then after the mics are turned off, they get a chance to talk to the host, to share their thoughts, and also to ask questions. It's a really great format. If you'd like to be in the audience, all you need to do is join the Conservation Careers Academy. Now, in the Conservation Careers Academy, you'll get full access to the world's biggest conservation job board, listing over 15,000 jobs, volunteer and internships across the globe each year. You'll also enjoy access to our amazing CC Pro private members community with regular events, networking and support. Plus, you'll get full access to our growing library of career boosting resources, guides and templates. And best of all, it only costs a few dollars, euros or pounds per month to join the Academy. Now, to find out more, please visit conservation-careers.com/academy or simply click the join button at the top of our website. See you on the inside.